All right. Well, welcome everybody to take charge of your finances with a cash flow plan with Dr. Meredith Jones. Dr. Meredith Jones is an emergency veterinarian who lives in the Richmond, Virginia area. She is a self-professed money nerd who attends financial conferences and reads about personal finance in her spare time. 4 years ago, she completed training to become a financial coach and founded the Debt Free Vets Facebook group. And she is also the co founder of the Veterinary Financial Summit. Today, we'll be talking about one of the very first steps in taking control of your personal finances, which is to create a budget. And that's what we're referring to here as a cash flow plan. And so, taking charge of finances isn't just about cutting back on expenses, it's also about prioritizing what matters most to you in life. And so Dr. Jones is going to talk to us about that. But like I mentioned before, she is the co founder of the Veterinary Financial Summit. And so we'll include the links with this recording to the Veterinary Financial Summit on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and for their website if you want to learn more about them. But without further ado, here is Dr. Meredith Jones.
All right, thanks Tiara for the introduction and thanks for joining me tonight. All right, so we're gonna get right into it. And so Tiara already talked about me a little bit, so I'm gonna breeze through this. I went to NC State. I paid off my student debt in 2014, and then I became a financial coach in 2016, took a course for that, and I've got the links right here. I'll show these again at the end to the Debt Free Vets Facebook group and then also the Vet Financial Summit. All right, so when we are thinking about money, I'd like to start out with just having you think about how did you think about money when you were a kid? So a lot of us, once we got a $5 bill in our pocket, it was burning a hole and we had to buy a toy. Some of us were more natural savers and we saved up that money and bought something bigger with it. It may have changed. The way you think about money may have changed as you were a college student, an undergrad, and then a vet student. And so for undergrad, some of us may have paid our way through. Some of us, our parents may have helped us out some. For some people, it was student loans. And then for most of us in vet school, student loans were covering the majority of what we were doing as far as our living expenses go. And so then you graduate and then suddenly you have all of this debt to pay off. You have to figure out, okay, how am I going to save so that I can retire one day, buy a house, how to discuss money with your spouse or your partner, figuring out how are you going to afford to have kids someday, and how are you going to pursue other financial goals. And so we're kind of hit with all of this at one time. And so where do you get started? And certainly vets have a limited financial and business education. It's just not something that was covered in a huge amount in vet school or otherwise. And a lot of times when we did get financial education, for those of us that did go through something either in undergrad or vet school where we were focused on finances for a short period of time, it may not have been really relatable to your life stage at the time. So what we find, and there have been studies about this, a lot of times when vet students are presented with ideas about student debt, for example, while they're in school, they're not paying it off. And so it's not directly relatable. It's not directly relevant to them. And so sometimes they either don't pay attention or it just doesn't really resonate with them. And so money, it's a learned skill. And so being good with money, it's not something that comes naturally to really anybody. And no matter where you start, you can always get better with money. So the reason that I talk about a cash flow plan rather than a budget, budgeting is certainly not a sexy word. And so we're going to talk today about taking control of your money, and we're going to call this a cash flow plan. And I got that term from Chris Hogan, who taught my financial coaching course. And so some of you guys may have heard of him. He used to work for Dave Ramsey. He's written a couple of books, Everyday Millionaires and Retire Inspired. And he called it a cash flow plan. And I really like that term because really, when we're thinking about money, 80% of personal finance is behavioral and 20% of it is head knowledge. And so we really want to think about uh, what kind of mindset we're in and change it a little bit. So I know a lot of you have probably heard the term live within your means. And so it's easier said than done. But living within your means is one of the foundations of personal finance in general. And we want to think about both short term goals and long term goals as we're going through this. And so, not just the long term, but we do want the short term goals as well, because we want to take a vacation. We want to have some of the things that we want now. It's not all about later. But there is also a component of instant gratification versus delayed gratification. And if we want to have a successful cash flow plan or successful budget, certainly delayed gratification is going to be part of that plan. So let's reframe the word budget. So reason I want to do that is because with budgeting, we think a lot about restriction, deprivation. We think about this scarcity mindset, penny pinching. But when we think about a cash flow plan, it's more of an abundance mindset. We're controlling what we can control with our money. And it's more of an idea of this continuous ebb and flow of income and expenses, money coming in, money going out. So what is your why? So why do you want to have a budget? Well, you got to feed your cats and your dogs and your horses. but what is really the reason that you want to take control of your finances? So we've talked a little bit about the short and long term money goals already. So certainly short term goals could be vacation, could be a starter emergency fund if you don't have an emergency fund started already. And then you've got the longer term goals like wanting to own a home someday or wanting to buy a practice or buy into a practice. Debt repayment, when I'm listing that, I'm thinking not only about student debt, but also about credit card debt. So certainly credit card debt would be something that I would put in my short term goal category unless I had a lot of it. And then for student debt, it really all depends on what your overall strategy is going to be, whether you're going to make that something that you're really focusing on or not. If you're not going to pay it off because you're going for the forgiveness program, then that may not be on your list of goals. So those are kind of the more concrete reasons for your why, for why you would want to develop a cash flow plan. But then there are also goals that are harder to measure. And really, for a lot of people, when they're taking control of their money or they're making a decision that they're going to do something different with their money, uh, a lot of these other things are more powerful motivations, wanting to get on the same page with your partner about your money and how it's being spent. Wanting to just have some weight off of your shoulders that, gosh, I've got this under control. It's not something that I have to worry about all the time. Feeling more secure. Eventually, a being goal of having more options because of the financial decisions that you've made. And that's what I mean when I'm talking about financial freedom in this context. So there are a few different budgeting methods. I'm going to go through a couple of them quickly, and then I'm going to go into another one in more depth. So one budgeting method is called the 50-30-20 rule. And so this is an effort to really simplify the way that we're looking at a budget. And I do really like this one. So you take 50% of your money pie and you kind of divide it into, okay, 50% is the things that I need, my food, my rent or my mortgage, utilities, that sort of thing. 30% designated to wants. So that's pretty good, right? Because if you can spend 30% of your take home pay on your wants, then that's a pretty good life. And then taking 20% and putting it towards savings. And when we're talking about that, we're not just talking about retirement, we're also talking about those shorter term goals like vacation, for example. All right. So with COVID, there are a lot of businesses that aren't accepting cash right now. I think that's going to change as we're going to not having to wear a mask all the time and changing some of the regulations and more people being vaccinated. But this is something that Dave Ramsey talks about a lot. And it's really geared toward people who have had a previous problem with spending. So this is not for everybody, but if you have areas of your life that you have in the past spent too much money on. So, spending too much money on clothes when you go shopping, or spending too much money on your pets, or eating out at restaurants, then you could actually take physical cash, put it in an envelope, and create a little budget for yourself that way. And it's an effort to avoid using credit cards and curb your spending habits. And so that's an idea for folks that need a little bit more control in particular areas. It's not something that I would do with my entire budget. So the one that I'm going to go into in more detail is the zero-based budget. And so what you're doing with that is you're giving every dollar a job, and then you've got more awareness and more control because you're more aware of it, more control over your money. So let's talk about expenses. So there are three categories of expenses. So there's your monthly fixed expenses. So those are your bills that are the same every month. Then you've got periodic fixed expenses. Those are the ones that people forget about a lot because maybe they only come up once a year, or maybe it only comes up a couple of times a year. And so we'll go into more depth on that. Then you've got your variable expenses. So that can be anything from some of your utilities, like your electricity bill that varies from one month to the next, on up to your food budget and entertainment budget. So monthly fixed expenses, and these are things to think about as you're actually developing your budget, and things to make sure that you don't forget about as you go through. So not only your mortgage or your rent and your car payment and your student loan payments, but your internet service, your subscriptions like Netflix, or if you subscribe to BarkBox or one of those beauty boxes, Hulu, things like that, gym membership. You want to make sure that you're listing those things so that you don't forget anything important on that list, because those can really add up over time. And then also your insurance expenses that are paid monthly. And as you're going through this, and we're talking about our fixed expenses, you want to make sure that you're not forgetting your savings, because you should be putting aside a set amount for savings each month, and make sure that you're paying your future self first. Okay, so periodic fixed expenses. So those are the ones that a lot of times people also forget about because they're not billed monthly. And so that's like your car insurance. That's like your tax bills, especially if you are a relief vet, or if you're a practice owner and you've got to pay taxes on a business. That's something that you want to make sure that you're not missing there. Car registration, so it's something that you don't have to pay every month, but you don't want to forget about. License fees, so that they don't sneak up on you at the end of the year. Veterinary licenses, association fees, that sort of thing. So variable expenses, those are also something that you got to make sure that you've got a handle on, because they can vary a lot from one month to another, or from one season to another. And for a lot of those, if it's not a utility, then for a lot of them, you've got a lot of control over how much you spend. And if you need to make cuts in your budget, that's where you're going to go. So examples of that would be like groceries, like your restaurant budget, takeout budget. travel, entertainment, charitable giving, because you might not be giving the same amount every month, holidays, clothing, that sort of thing. All right, so I'm going to go through a couple of case studies. And so this first one is Dr. Sarah Surplus. And so she's 27, so she's a relatively new grad. She lives in a low cost of living area. She's got an annual income of 80,000. When we divide that out, she's got a gross income of 6,000 and change. And then she contributes some pre-tax monthly deductions. And so she's got, whether that's her 401k or whether that's her health insurance, that comes out of her paycheck before she ever sees it. And so once that is taken out and once taxes are taken out, her take-home pay is about $4,500 a month. Okay, so we've got an example budget here, and if you live in California, then you might be laughing at at the rent here. So low cost of living area is where Dr. Sarah lives, and so this is just an example. And so we go through, and we've got our rent up here, then we've got our car payment, gas on down the line, down to the bottom where we've also got gym membership and Netflix and things like that. And she also saves $500 a month. And so that's great. And so her expenses for the month come out to be 3,000 and change. And what's left over down here at the end of the month is $835. But this is a zero-based budget. So we want that number to be zero because we want to give every dollar a job. And so what do we do with that surplus? Well, we've got options and really they're endless. So she could put that extra money in her emergency fund if she doesn't have enough saved. She could add it to her retirement account. She could save for a vacation. She could save for something bigger like a house or buying into a practice. And so the point of the zero-based budget is that we want to give every single dollar a job and have a zero balance at the end. So she's done really well. Now we have another doctor, and her name is Dr. Diane Deficit. And so she's the same age, she makes the same amount of money, everything else is the same, take-home pay is the same. All right. But her expenses are higher. Nearly everything on this list is higher. Her student loans are the same, but her rent is higher, her car payment is higher. And she must have had quite a fun month because look at her entertainment budget. It is $700. And so I don't know if she bought tickets to Hamilton or if she went to Cirque du Soleil or what's going on, but she overspent. So you can see at the bottom that she actually spent over $4,900, even though her net take-home pay was $4,500. And so she's left with a negative balance down here of $455. So what do we do when that happens? So what you do, you got to figure out how are you going to cover that? So she could cover it with her savings. Hopefully she's got some money saved up in a savings account somewhere. Hopefully she can just use it that way. If she doesn't, then she's going to have to borrow money somehow. So she's going to have to either use a credit card, because that's one way of borrowing money, right? To use a credit card. Or she may have to borrow money as a personal loan from someone. And so what do we do with that moving forward? Because we're at a negative balance. She owes money at the end of the month. And so she's going to have to figure out some way of trimming her expenses the following month to make up for that. And so the next month, what we see is that she cut some items in her budget. So she cut her grocery bill down some. She had bought clothes the month before. This month she didn't buy any clothes, and she cut her entertainment budget down dramatically. not only to make it so that she didn't go into a deficit in month 2, but also enough so that she could make up for that 455 that she overspent the previous month. And so she ended up only spending about 4,000 so that she could make up for what happened last month. And she ended up with a zero budget at the end of month 2. And so, a common question that I get from vets is, well, what do I do if I have an irregular income? And so, if you're a relief vet, or if you're on straight production pay, or I know some vets who are actually paid per shift rather than being paid salary, uh, you got to look at your budget a little bit differently. And so, what I recommend doing is looking at your lowest income month. So you would take the past year, look at your budget, look at your cash flow plan, or look at just back at your expenses over the past year. Pick the lowest income month and write down your essential expenses, and then write down the other expenses in order of priority from highest to lowest. And when I'm talking about essential expenses, I'm talking about the ones that you would get in trouble if you didn't pay them. So I'm talking about your rent, because nobody wants to nobody wants to be in trouble with their landlord. Your car payment, because nobody wants their car to get repossessed, and then on down the line. And so when you're looking at that, you're figuring out, okay, how much money do I have left to spend? And then we get to these things down at the bottom that are less important. And of course, these could be different priority for you. You might have uh, your savings up higher than your groceries, or something like that. It's going to be tailored to you, and you're the one who gets to make the list. But in this example, if you had a month that you didn't really make a whole lot, you would look down at the bottom and you probably wouldn't have any money left, and you'd say, okay, well, I don't buy clothing this month, or I don't get to eat out this month, or I'm not donating any money this month, that sort of thing. So it's a matter of ranking those expenses. And then if you've got a light month, then you just have some spending categories that are not taken into account. Okay, so things to remember when you are looking at your budget, of course, evaluating your needs versus your wants, being really intentional with your money. And I want to emphasize that it is okay and it is recommended for you to include fun money in your plan. So that's why we had those categories of entertainment, Netflix, that sort of thing. Whatever it is that you like to do, whatever it is that you love to do, your hobbies, that sort of thing, make sure that you work that into your budget. Because that's the thing with the cash flow plan. It's not all about just cutting the expenses. It's actually about looking at, okay, what do I want to spend my money on? And so, yeah, there's always going to be those things that you have to spend your money on, but we also want to look at what do you want to prioritize, and take that into account when you're looking at your cash flow plan. The first few months, if you're not used to budgeting, the first few months that you have your cash flow plan, it is not going to be perfect. You're going to be making adjustments, especially over the first 3 months. There's going to be things you forget. Uh, there are going to be things that you need to adjust. You may not realize how much money you were spending on DoorDash, and you might decide to change things. All right. So I have a little poll here about budgeting and how you've budgeted. And so go ahead and put in the chat, if you're not budgeting, that's cool. If you have budgeted, have you used an app? Have you used a spreadsheet? How have you done that? All right. Mint. Yeah. Yeah, I've heard some good things about mint. All right. Very good. Okay, yeah, Mint's on my list. I have used YNAB or You Need a Budget, and so that's a good one as well. There's everydollar.com, that's a free one through Dave Ramsey's company. And so uh, I know that the You Need a Budget and Every Dollar, those are the zero based budgeting programs. Mint, I'm not sure if they do it that way or not. Let me know, Tiara, if they do it that way. And then, of course, there's always the old school way of doing it by a spreadsheet as well, whether that's digital or on paper. Okay, so let's talk about how to reduce expenses. So, geographic arbitrage, I'm looking at. Yeah, okay, that is how they do it with Mint. Okay, cool. So, okay, geographic arbitrage. So, what I mean by that is you're going to take advantage of living in a low cost of living area where your money is going to have more purchasing power. And of course, that's not for everybody. A lot of people love living in California or they really want to live in the city, and it's not something that they're going to take advantage of, but it is something to think about if you want to reduce expenses in a major way. I do know some vets who have moved from a high cost of living area to a lower cost of living area because they were focusing on paying off their student debt. I also know folks who have said, "Well, I'm not going to do that because I could make so much more money in California, but I'm going to drive 45 minutes into the city so that I can take advantage of geographic arbitrage that way." So there are different ways of doing it. Paying cash for vehicles certainly is a way of reducing expenses because that's taken care of. Then you don't have a car payment. Eating out less often, easier said than done, but it's certainly a way to reduce expenses and really probably one of the best opportunities to reduce expenses if that is one of your goals. Or if you have a particular financial goal that you want to make sure that you hit in a certain amount of time, that's a temporary thing that you can do or a permanent thing if you learn how to cook more and enjoy it. So eliminating subscriptions that you don't use. So yeah, a lot of us have had a gym membership that we didn't use enough, and so that's the classic example there. But also taking a look at some of those less expensive subscriptions and really taking a look at your statements and saying, okay, well, am I really using that? Is that something that I really need? And it's just making sure that you're keeping those down to the bare minimum of what you're using and enjoying. And then just continuously, as you're thinking about reducing expenses, ask yourself, is it a need or is it a want? Okay, so we all want to make more money, right? So, ways to increase your income. And of course, when we're talking about budgeting, there's really only so much you can cut back before you start making some serious sacrifices. And nobody wants to live in a box. So, it's not just all about reducing your income and penny pinching. It's also, if you can find ways to increase your income, that's actually a way that you can have more money in your budget to work with. So certainly don't underestimate the power of increasing your income. And so one of the most common ways that vets can do this is to work extra shifts. So working ER shifts, working relief shifts. Certainly, if you are overwhelmed and overstressed, then you may choose not to do that, and that's fine. But certainly, probably for most of us, the most viable option to increase our income. And then certainly when you are taking on a new job or when you are signing a new contract for work, negotiating a higher salary, making sure that you are getting paid what you're worth and looking at your production and making sure that you're getting those numbers and making sure that your pay makes sense for what you're bringing into the practice. So, certainly, that is a way to increase your income as well. Selling items. So a lot of us have old electronics that are sitting around that we could probably sell, and if we sold all of them, we could probably make a few $100. So that's a way to increase your income. And then if you're in a KonMari mood and you're going through your stuff and you find that you've got enough stuff to sell at a yard sale, that would be another way of increasing your income. Starting a side hustle, starting a business. I know every business under the sun, I've heard of a vet doing it. So anything from selling makeup to putting on events. And so the side hustle is certainly it's becoming more popular in our profession. And if it's something you're interested in doing, there's probably somebody who will partner up with you and help you do it. So, and certainly practice owners on average make more than associates. It's not true across the board, but on average, that's the case. Okay, so everybody's going to run into an issue with their cash flow plan at some point, and it's not going to work. And so, usually, that's either due to loss of income or it's due to increased expenses, or sometimes it can be both. And so, unexpected events can come up, like you lose your job or other industries that were hit by COVID and were seriously hit. And there were sectors of the veterinary uh, field that COVID initially affected us in that way, and then of course it skyrocketed. Disability, medical issues, if something major happens to your house or you've got a major car repair, those are all things that unfortunately do happen. And so not only do you need to make sure that you're covered by proper insurance, but you also need to make sure that you've got an emergency fund to help protect you in those scenarios. And of course, emergency funds are important because Murphy's law happens, life happens, and if you don't have an emergency fund, it is going to completely derail your budget that you have spent so much time focusing on. And so there are two levels of emergency fund that I like to talk about. There's a starter emergency fund, and then there is a larger emergency fund. And so while you're paying off debts, so for a lot of people, I mean consumer debt when I'm saying that, because not everybody's going to actually pay off their student debt because they might be going for forgiveness. But if you're paying off credit card debt, for example, you want to make sure that you still have enough money set aside for an emergency to come up. So, classically, I've heard a lot of people, like Dave Ramsey, for example, say, oh, $1,000 is good for an emergency fund. In my opinion, that's not enough money because you want to make sure that you've got enough set aside to take care of an expense that's going to be a little bit larger. So the marker that I like to use is I want to make sure that for a starter emergency fund, I want to make sure that you've got enough set aside that you could actually pay for an emergency surgery for your dog if they needed it. And of course, some people say, okay, well, I have pet insurance for that. If you do, great. But $3,000 to $5,000 at least is what I would set aside for an emergency fund as a starter. And then the larger emergency fund, so this is going to be a longer term goal, would be 3 to 6 months of expenses. Okay, so for everybody, I have alluded to this a little bit already with insurance. For everybody, you want to make sure that you are protected against catastrophic events that you couldn't pay for out of pocket. That's why we have home insurance, auto insurance, health insurance. You want to make sure those things are covered: life insurance, disability insurance, your professional liability insurance. I put pet insurance on here today. Arguably, you may or may not need it. If I had a dachshund, I would probably get it. Um, and then some people say, well, if I've got enough set aside, if I've got that 3 to 6 months of expenses, I can probably cover my pet expenses if an emergency comes up, and I agree with that. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about automating your finances, because once you've got that budget ready to go and you've done this a few months, and you kind of know what you're doing at that point, it would be cool to go ahead and then automate some of what you're doing with your money so that you don't have to think about it anymore. And so Ramit Sethi, who I'm a big fan of, he wrote this book called I Will Teach You to Be Rich. And in that book, he says automating your money will be the single most profitable system you ever build. And so what we mean by that is that instead of transferring your money manually whenever you just feel like it, or whenever you have the time, or whenever you have money left over, everything's done automatically. And I've got a whole talk I could do about this, but we're just going to go through this quickly. So you've got, of course, your gross income, and your taxes are going to be taken out of that automatically. Your 401k, if you're contributing to that through your work, is going to be taken out as well. And then you've got your net income that's going to go into your bank account. So if you start automating your money, what you would do is you would take, for example, maybe another 5% and put that into a retirement account like a Roth IRA. Take another 5 to 10%, put it in your savings account so that you've got enough to go on vacation or whatever financial goal you have, saving up for a down payment on a house, for example. And then after that, you're going to also go ahead and automate all of your bill payments. So your credit card payments, any payments that you can't pay by credit card. And so if you automate all of these things, then at the end of the month, you can just see what your balance is, and you can spend that guilt free, and you don't have to worry about it, because all of these other things are taken care of. Your retirement's taken care of, your savings is taken care of. And so you've got all this money you can spend guilt free. So that's fun. Okay. Another thing that comes up with budgeting and with a cash flow plan is relationships and money, and wanting to be on the same page with your partner. And it's really one of the biggest concerns that anyone has about money, whether they talk about it or not. And so, being in a relationship, whether you like it or not, it's going to affect your finances one way or another. It might be a positive way, or it might be a negative way. And your spouse or your partner, they may have a different money mindset than you do. And so it's something to keep in mind, and it's something that a lot of couples have to work through. And it's best to talk about money issues sooner rather than later, before they become so big that you get divorced or you break up. And certainly, money is one of, if not the major cause of divorce in the United States. And so it's important to think about this. So you want to find some way of combining your finances that's going to work for both partners. So that might be joint accounts. It might be joint accounts plus minus separate accounts. Depends on the dynamics in your relationship. It depends on what your goals are. Always be open about your debt and your credit score. Just make sure everybody's on the same page. I've heard stories where people were about to get married and somebody didn't realize that somebody had a lot of student debt, and then it became this big issue. So just be open about it. Compromising, because you're not always going to agree, and having a teamwork attitude, and talking about your goals, talking about your life goals, talking about your financial goals, and making it something that is a regular part of your discussions, is a healthy way of going about it. All right, so takeaways from this. So always remember your why, because we're not just developing a cash flow plan because it's fun. Where there's going to be some why behind it, and that why is going to help to keep you motivated. And so, mm, whether it's because you want to just have that weight off of your shoulders, or whether it's because you want to be on the same page with your partner about what's going on, just remember why you're doing that to start with. And then choose the best cash flow plan for you, whether it's the zero-based budget that I went into in detail, whether it's the 50/30/20 budgeting. It's very simple. Choose what works for you. And certainly, this is all about being in control of your money. If we know where our money is going, um, uh, then we know what tweaks we can make, and we know what changes we can make so that we can get to our goals. Don't forget to budget for an emergency fund if you don't already have one saved, and don't forget to budget for insurance as well. Automate your finances as much as possible so you don't have to think about it every day. And certainly discussing financial goals with your partner. All right, so where you can find me, and certainly the Veterinary Financial Summit website. The next summit is going to be in September, and it's going to be virtual. It's going to be September 18th and 19th, which is over a weekend. I do have a promo code for Black DVM Network members, and that's a 25% off code. And so we can make sure that that you guys get that. And certainly feel free to contact me. I've got my email down there. Certainly feel free to email me with any questions that you have. And I also have the Debt Free Vets Facebook group URL down there. So join us there if you haven't already. All right. Any questions?
Awesome. Thank you, Meredith. That was a really informative presentation. And like she said, if there are any questions, feel free to ask them now. And I know I have some, but I will wait.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. All right. I know we're a small group tonight, so
So I will go ahead and ask my question. When it comes to saving money, do you always like save into your bank account, or I guess maybe it's not personal, but do you have strategies for saving outside of bank accounts, or like savings accounts? Like, do you have other strategies for saving money? I think some people say that they might invest some of the money that they save so that it's growing while they're holding on to it.
Mhm. Yeah, so it depends on what you're saving the money for. So, for example, if you're saving the emergency fund, I recommend saving in some kind of savings account. So you're not gonna make money off of your emergency fund because you just want to have it handy. And so those are usually best put into some of those high interest savings accounts, something that you can access quickly. I say high interest savings, but it's really like 1%, or if you're lucky, it's 2%. So you're not making a whole lot of money on that. For folks who are going for forgiveness with their student debt, a lot of people are saving their money for the tax bomb in various ways. And I'm not a financial advisor, so I can't really say how you should do that. There are some folks who are saving for the tax bomb in taxable investment accounts of various sorts, and putting it into low index funds, mutual funds, or putting it into, some folks are putting them into, putting the money into more aggressive funds when they're younger, with a plan of going less aggressive as they get closer to actually owing the tax bomb. So that is a way of setting aside savings. I wouldn't do that with my emergency fund, but I would consider doing that with your money that you're saving toward the tax bomb if you're going for forgiveness with your student debt. So that may be what you've heard about
Gotcha.
folks doing.
Cool. Thank you. And then really quickly, for anyone that might not be familiar, can you just briefly explain the tax bomb?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so the tax bond. So with your student debt, you've got, overall, you have two different repayment strategies. You're either going to pay it off as quickly as possible, or for a lot of folks, especially newer grads that went to school with higher interest rates and higher tuition, a lot of you are not going to pay off your student debt, and you're going to go for the forgiveness plans. And so those are like pay, repay, income driven repayment plans. And so in that situation, in addition to needing to have an emergency fund, and in addition to, of course, paying the minimum balance, the minimum payments on your student debt each month, you also need to save money for the tax bomb, because at the end of the 20 to 25-year payment plan with those, um, you are going to need to pay taxes on the money that is forgiven at the 20-year mark or at the 25-year mark. And so for a lot of folks, that's going to be tens of thousands of dollars that they are going to owe. For some of you, it may be even more than that, that you are going to owe in 20 to 25 years. And so that's the tax bomb. And so you want to make sure that you are setting aside money on a monthly basis to make sure that you've got that money in 20 to 25 years so that you're not in trouble with the IRS.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mhm. All right. Well, this has been fun.
Yeah. Any other questions, Lenice? Do you have any questions at all for Meredith? If not, that's totally fine. Well, yes, it has been. Thank you so much for sharing all of that information with us tonight, and hopefully with the audience that will be watching this recording. And then thank you again for the discount code for the Financial Summit. Definitely hope to see some people there. So we appreciate you.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the Vet Financial Summit, just a little summary on what that is. So what we are doing with that is we're covering both personal finance and practice finance. So it's investing, entrepreneurship, student debt, and then also practice ownership, practice finance. And so it's a unique conference, and it's going to be virtual. So hopefully some of you folks can join us this year.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. We really appreciate it, and we hope to see you again at some point.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Tiara.
Yeah, of course. And it looks like Lenice is giving you a clapping reaction too. She
Yay. All right.
enjoyed.
Thank you. Thanks for joining me.
Yes. All right. Well, I'll be in touch, Meredith. Thanks so much.
All right.
All
Take
right.
care.
Bye.
Bye.